Have you ever made a mistake that changed your life forever? For 23-year-old Clara Vance, it was just a few words spoken in frustration. She thought she was muttering to herself in an empty hallway, using a language she had tried to forget. She didn't know he was listening. She didn't know that the cold, terrifying man standing in the shadows was Nikolai Volkov, the most dangerous crime lord in New York City. And she definitely didn't know that those 3 Russian words would unlock a secret past she was never supposed to find. What happens when a simple waitress accidentally proves she belongs to a world of blood and money? You won't believe the truth. The gala for the Sterling Foundation was the kind of event where the champagne cost more than Clara Vance's annual rent. It was held at the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue, a bastion of old New York money and new, dangerous power. Clara adjusted the uncomfortable collar of her catering uniform, her hands trembling slightly as she balanced a silver tray of caviar blinis. "Keep moving, Vance." "You're slowing down the line," hissed Marco, the floor manager. He was a small man with too much hair gel and a Napoleon complex. "Sorry, Marco." "My feet are just... It's been 6 hours," Clara whispered, tucking a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "I don't pay you to have feelings in your feet. I pay you to be invisible. Go. Table 4 needs refreshing." Clara nodded, swallowing her pride. She needed this job. Her student loans for her nursing degree at NYU were crushing her, and her grandmother's medical bills at Mount Sinai were piling up faster than she could open the envelopes. She moved through the crowd of tuxedos and designer gowns like a ghost. That was her superpower, invisibility. She had spent her entire life trying not to be noticed, a habit drilled into her by a childhood spent in foster care in Queens. She reached table 4. It was occupied by a group of men who felt heavier than the rest of the room. The air around them was colder. They didn't laugh. They smirked. In the center sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He wore a tuxedo that fit too perfectly, likely a custom Brioni. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and a jagged scar ran just beneath his jawline, disappearing into his collar. This was Nikolai Volkov. Even Clara, who tried to ignore the news, knew the name. The papers called him a shipping magnate. The streets called him the devil of Brighton Beach. Clara placed the tray down, her hand shaking. A drop of condensation from a glass fell onto the pristine tablecloth. One of the men, a brute with a thick neck named Boris, slammed his hand on the table. "You stupid girl! Watch what you are doing!" Clara flinched, the tray clattering loudly. The entire ballroom seemed to go silent. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get a napkin." "Get out of my face," Boris growled, standing up. He loomed over her, smelling of expensive scotch and violence. Incompetent American trash. Clara backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned and practically ran toward the service corridor, tears pricking her eyes. She pushed through the heavy velvet curtains into the back hallway, finally alone. She leaned against the cool plaster wall, hyperventilating. The frustration boiled over. The fear, the exhaustion, the humiliation, it all came rushing out. Without thinking, she squeezed her eyes shut and muttered a phrase she hadn't spoken since she was 5 years old. It was something her mother used to whisper to her before the fire, before the foster homes, before everything went dark. "Gospodi, de mne sil proiti chereze tot ad." Lord, give me the strength to walk through this hell. The Russian words felt foreign yet familiar on her tongue, heavy with a thick, archaic accent that didn't belong in 2025 New York. Where did you learn that dialect? The voice was deep, resonant, and terrifyingly close. Clara froze. She opened her eyes. Standing 10 feet away, having just exited the VIP restroom, was Nikolai Volkov. He wasn't looking at her with the disdain his bodyguard had shown. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. He was staring at her mouth as if trying to lip-read the echo of her words. "I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't be here." Clara stammered in English, pushing herself off the wall to flee. "Stop," Nikolai said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command that vibrated in her bones. He took a step closer. You spoke Old Kievan Russian. No one speaks that anymore, not unless they were raised by the old guard. Clara shook her head frantically. I don't know what you're talking about. I heard it in a movie once. Please, I need to get back to work. She bolted. She ran past him, expecting him to grab her arm, but he didn't. He just stood there, frozen, watching her blonde hair disappear around the corner. Clara made it back to the kitchen, her hands trembling so badly she dropped a stack of napkins. She spent the rest of the night hiding in the scullery, washing dishes, just to avoid going back out onto the floor. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Nikolai Volkov pulled out his phone. His hand, usually steady enough to aim a sniper rifle from a mile away, was clenched tight. He dialed a number. Victor, Nikolai said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. The waitress. Blonde. Blue eyes. Find out who she is. Find out where she lives. And bring her to me. Tonight. Clara's shift ended at 2 a.m. Her feet were swollen and her spirit was broken. Marco had fired her anyway, citing the, quote, disturbance at table 4. She walked out of the service entrance of the Pierre Hotel into the biting November wind of Manhattan. She pulled her thin coat tighter around her body and headed toward the subway station at 59th Street and Lexington. The city was never truly quiet, but the streets felt ominous tonight. Shadows seemed to stretch longer. Every car engine sounded like a threat. Clara kept her head down, clutching her purse. She was thinking about how she was going to pay the rent for her apartment in Astoria. A black Cadillac Escalade idled at the curb near the subway entrance. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like black mirrors. As Clara passed it, the rear door slid open. Before she could scream, 2 men in dark suits were on the sidewalk. They moved with military precision. One grabbed her arms, pinning them to her sides. The other placed a gloved hand over her mouth. Don't scream, Miss Vance, the man holding her whispered. Mr. Volkov insists on your company. She kicked and thrashed, her heels scraping against the concrete, but it was useless. They were too strong. They lifted her into the back of the SUV like she was a doll. The door slammed shut, engaging the child locks instantly. Clara scrambled to the other side of the leather seat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Please, take my purse. Take whatever you want. Just let me go. Sitting opposite her, looking calm and terrifyingly composed, was Nikolai Volkov. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He didn't look like a kidnapper. He looked like a king holding court. I don't want your purse, Clara, Nikolai said softly. He knew her name. How did he already know her name? You can't do this. People will look for me, Clara lied. No one would look for her. Not for days. We are going to my estate in Saddle River, Nikolai stated, ignoring her threat. You are going to answer some questions. If you answer truthfully, you will be returned home with enough money to pay off your student loans. If you lie, he let the sentence hang in the air. The ride took 40 minutes. Clara spent the entire time pressing herself against the door, watching the city lights fade into the darkness of New Jersey highways. She tried to memorize the route, Route 4, the Garden State Parkway, but her mind was racing with panic. The car turned onto a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. At the end stood a mansion that looked more like a fortress. Stone walls, iron gates, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter with German shepherds. The car stopped. The door opened. Nikolai stepped out and offered her a hand. Clara ignored it, scrambling out and backing away. Inside, he commanded. They walked into a grand foyer that smelled of cedar and old leather. A massive portrait hung above the fireplace. A painting of a stern-looking family from the turn of the century. Nikolai led her into a library, gestured for her to sit in a wingback chair, and poured her a glass of water. He sat opposite her, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. Who taught you those words, Clara? Clara stared at the water, her throat dry. I told you. I don't know. Do not lie to me. Nikolai's voice cracked like a whip, causing Clara to jump. That dialect is specific to the Vorvi Zakona, the original thieves-in-law from the Kiev region. It hasn't been spoken colloquially since the purge of 1998. You are 23 years old. You grew up in Queen's foster care. There is no reason for you to know it." "My mother!" Clara screamed back, the fear turning into defensive anger. "Okay, my mother used to say it before she died." Nikolai went still. His eyes narrowed. "Your mother died in a house fire in 2007. According to the records my men pulled while we drove here. Her name was Sarah Vance." "Yes," Clara whispered, tears spilling over. "She died trying to get me out." "Describe her," Nikolai demanded. "Not Sarah Vance, the woman beneath the name." "She was beautiful. She had a scar," Clara said, touching her own shoulder. "Here, a burn mark shaped like a star. She said it was an angel's kiss." Nikolai's face went pale. The color drained from his skin so fast it looked painful. He stood up abruptly, the crystal glass in his hand shattering as he squeezed it too hard. Shards of glass and whiskey fell onto the Persian rug. He didn't even flinch at the blood dripping from his palm. "Impossible," he muttered, switching to Russian. "Ona martva." She is dead. Clara understood him. Without thinking, she responded in English. "Who is dead?" Nikolai looked at her, his eyes wild. He walked over to a bookshelf and pulled down a thick, leather-bound photo album. He flipped through the pages aggressively until he landed on a black-and-white photograph. He ripped it out and slammed it onto the table in front of Clara. "Is this her?" Clara looked down. It was a picture of a young woman, maybe 20 years old, standing in the snow in front of a dacha in Russia. She was smiling, holding a bundle of blankets. But the eyes, they were Clara's eyes, and on her exposed shoulder, visible because of the way her dress hung, was a star-shaped scar. "That's my mom," Clara gasped, tracing the photo. "But she looks so rich here. We were poor. We lived in a basement apartment." "That woman," Nikolai said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and grief, "was not Sarah Vance. That was Katerina Volkov, my sister." Clara's world tilted on its axis. "Your sister?" "She was kidnapped 20 years ago by our rivals, the Moretti family. We were told she was executed. We buried an empty casket." Nikolai fell to his knees in front of Clara, ignoring the blood on his hand, staring into her face as if seeing a ghost. "If she was your mother, that makes you my niece. You are a Volkov." The silence in the room was deafening. Clara shook her head. No, I'm just a waitress. I'm nobody." "You are the heir to the largest criminal empire on the East Coast," Nikolai corrected her. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the library burst open. Victor, the bodyguard, rushed in, his gun drawn but pointed at the floor. "Boss," Victor panted, "we have a problem. The Morettis, they know she's here. They saw us pick her up. We're under attack." As if on cue, a massive explosion rocked the front of the mansion, shattering the library windows and throwing Clara and Nikolai to the floor. The library was filled with smoke and the deafening ringing of the explosion. Clara coughed, curled into a ball on the Persian rug, glass shards tangling in her hair. She felt a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Get up," Nikolai roared. He wasn't the shaken uncle anymore. He was the general. He hauled Clara to her feet with one arm, his other hand already gripping a silver pistol he'd pulled from a hidden holster beneath the desk. "What is happening?" Clara screamed, stumbling as the floor shook from another blast. "The Morettis! They've been hunting for the lost heir for as long as I have," Nikolai shouted over the blaring security alarms. "If they take you, they control the Volkov seat. I won't let that happen." He dragged her out of the library into the hallway. The grand foyer was a war zone. Volkov's guards were exchanging fire with men in tactical gear storming through the blown-out front doors. Bullets chipped away at the marble columns. A chandelier crashed to the floor, exploding into a million crystals. "Victor, the safe room!" Nikolai barked. Victor, bleeding from a graze on his forehead, nodded and provided covering fire with an assault rifle. "Go! I'll hold the east wing!" Nikolai pushed Clara toward a servant's entrance hidden behind a tapestry. They ran down a narrow stone staircase into the darkness of the basement. The air was cool and damp. "Why do they want me?" Clara cried, her breath hitching. "I don't know anything." Nikolai stopped at a steel door, punching a code into a keypad. "It's not about what you know, Clara. It's about blood. In our world, blood is the only currency that matters. As long as you are alive, the Moretti claim to the territory is weak. They want to marry you into their family or kill you. There is no third option." The steel door hissed open, revealing a high-tech bunker lined with monitors, weapons, and supplies. Nikolai shoved her inside and locked the door, spinning the heavy wheel. "We are safe here," he said, though he didn't holster his weapon. He moved to the monitors, watching the camera feeds. His men were falling back. The attackers were ruthless. Clara slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. "You said my mother was your sister, Katerina." Nikolai paused, looking at a screen where the library they had just been in was now engulfed in flames. He turned to look at her. "Katerina was the light of our family. When she disappeared, my father, your grandfather, went mad with grief. He started a war that burned half the city. We thought she was dead." "She never told me," Clara whispered. "She never told me who she was. She just said we had to hide. That bad men were looking for us." "She was protecting you," Nikolai said softly. "She gave up her crown to keep you safe, and now I have dragged you right back into the fire." Suddenly, the power in the bunker cut out. The monitors went black. The emergency red lights flickered on, casting the room in a bloody glow. "They cut the line," Nikolai hissed. "They know we're down here. They're bringing a thermal drill." "What do we do?" Clara asked, terror seizing her chest. Nikolai walked over to a weapon rack and pulled down a smaller handgun. He checked the clip and handed it to her. "Do you know how to use this?" Clara shook her head violently. "No, I'm a nursing student. I fix people, I don't shoot them." "Point and pull the trigger. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me or Victor, you shoot. Do you understand?" "I can't." "You are a Volkov!" Nikolai grabbed her shoulders. "It is in your blood. Fight, Clara, or die." A loud, mechanical grinding noise started at the door. Sparks began to fly from the hinges. They were cutting through. Nikolai took a position behind a metal desk, aiming at the door. Clara hid behind a stack of crates, gripping the gun so hard her knuckles turned white. The door blew inward with a concussive blast. Smoke filled the room. Figures in gas masks poured in. Nikolai opened fire. 2 men dropped instantly. He moved with terrifying speed, precise and lethal. But there were too many of them. A flashbang grenade rolled across the floor. Bang! A blinding white light. A ringing in her ears. Clara couldn't see. She felt rough hands grab her hair, dragging her up. "Got her!" a voice shouted. "Secure the package!" "No!" Nikolai's voice sounded far away. Clara kicked and screamed, firing the gun blindly. The bullet hit the ceiling. Someone punched her hard in the stomach, knocking the wind out of her. The gun clattered away. As her vision started to clear, she saw Nikolai on the floor, surrounded by 3 men, blood pouring from his shoulder. He was reaching for her. "Uncle!" she screamed. The words slipped out before she could stop it. A man in a sleek gray suit stepped through the smoke. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He looked like a businessman, but his eyes were reptilian. This was Luca Moretti, the son of the rival Don. He looked at Clara, then down at Nikolai. "A touching family reunion," Luca sneered. He grabbed Clara's chin, forcing her to look at him. "You look just like your mother. Let's hope you're smarter than she was." "Let her go, Luca!" Nikolai roared, trying to stand, but a guard kicked him back down. "Oh, I'm not letting her go," Luca smiled, a cold, predatory grin. "I'm going to make her my wife, and then I'm going to take everything you have." Luca signaled his men. "Leave the old man. Let him bleed out. It's a slower death." They dragged Clara out of the bunker, her screams echoing off the concrete walls. Nikolai lay on the floor, watching his newfound niece, his sister's daughter, being taken into the darkness. He dragged himself toward the wall, leaving a trail of blood. He reached for a hidden panel under the desk that the Morettis hadn't seen. He pressed a button. a silent alarm. Not to the police, but to the Bratva elites in Moscow. "You took her once," Nikolai whispered, his vision fading. "You won't keep her." Clara woke up in a room that cost more than her entire college education. The sheets were 1,000 thread-count Egyptian cotton, the furniture was minimalist Italian design, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River from a Tribeca penthouse. It was exquisite. It was a prison. She rushed to the windows. They were reinforced ballistic glass. The door was locked from the outside. She was trapped in Luca Moretti's world now, a world of sleek modernity that masked ancient cruelties. The door clicked open, and Luca entered. He had changed out of his dusty suit into fresh charcoal trousers and a cashmere sweater. He looked like a hedge fund manager, not a man who had just ordered the execution of her uncle. "Did you sleep well, Principessa?" he asked, his voice smooth like velvet over gravel. "Where is Nikolai?" Clara demanded, surprised by the strength in her own voice. The fear was still there, paralyzing and cold, but beneath it burned a new feeling. Rage. They had taken her life, her identity, and now her only living relative. Luca walked to a wet bar and poured 2 espressos from a silver machine. "Nikolai is dead. Or he will be soon. My men are thorough. Forget him. You have a new family now." He held out a small cup. Clara stared at it, refusing to take it. "Drink," Luca ordered, the facade slipping just enough to show the beast underneath. "We have a long day ahead of us. We need to get you fitted for a dress." "A dress?" "For our wedding. Tomorrow." Clara laughed. It was a dry, hysterical sound. "You're insane. I won't marry you." Luca set the cup down slowly. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, grabbing her wrist. His grip was painful. He dragged her to a large mirror on the wall. "Look at yourself, Clara. What do you see? A waitress from Queens? A nobody nursing student buried in debt?" He leaned close, whispering into her ear, his reflection looming over hers. "I see the last drop of Volkov blood. My father, Don Antonio, is dying in a hospital bed at Lenox Hill. When he takes his last breath, the 5 families will tear each other apart, trying to take his throne. But if I unite the Moretti and Volkov lines, no one can touch me. You are my shield, and you will marry me." He released her with a shove. "If you refuse, I won't kill you. You're too valuable. But I will find that grandmother of yours in Mount Sinai. Accidents happen in hospitals all the time." Clara went cold. The threat hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. "You wouldn't." "Try me." Luca checked his platinum Rolex. "The dressmaker arrives in an hour. Wash your face. You look like a victim. Start looking like a queen." He left, locking the door behind him. Clara sank to the floor, the weight of her reality crushing her. She had no choice. For her grandmother's sake, she had to play his game. Meanwhile, in the smoldering ruins of the Saddle River estate, a hand burst through the debris in the basement bunker. Victor, coughing blood, pushed a heavy metal cabinet aside. He found Nikolai unconscious beneath the desk, pale from blood loss, but alive. The Morettis had been sloppy. They assumed the old lion was dead. Victor dragged Nikolai out of the bunker and into the cool night air. He pulled out a satellite phone, bypassing local networks that the Morettis were surely monitoring. He dialed a number that hadn't been used in 10 years. The call connected to a dacha outside of Moscow. "It's Victor," he grated out in Russian. "They hit us. Luca Moretti has the girl. Nikolai is down." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a voice like grinding stones spoke. "Activate the Voroi. We are coming to America." Nikolai groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He grabbed Victor's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Did you make the call?" "Yes, boss. The cavalry is coming." Nikolai stared at the burning remains of his home, the fire reflected in his gray eyes, lighting a hatred that was terrifying to behold. "Good! Burn it all down!" Luca Moretti thinks he won a prize. He just invited the devil to his wedding. The wedding was held at a small, deconsecrated chapel in Greenwich Village that the Moretti family owned. It was a rushed affair, meant to be legally binding before anyone could stop it. Clara stood in the vestry, looking at herself in a tarnished mirror. The dress Luca had chosen was stunning, a vintage lace gown that must have cost a fortune, but on her, it felt like a shroud. Her hair was styled in complex braids, woven with diamonds. She looked beautiful. She looked like a stranger. 2 guards stood by the door. There was no way out. She thought about her grandmother, safe in her hospital bed, unaware that her granddaughter was selling her soul to ensure that safety. "It's time, Miss Vance," one of the guards said, opening the door. The chapel was dimly lit with hundreds of candles. The air smelled of incense and fear. The pews were filled with grim-faced men in expensive suits, capos and soldiers of the Moretti crime family, here to witness the consolidation of power. At the altar stood Luca. He looked triumphant in a black tuxedo, his reptilian eyes gleaming as she approached. He didn't look at her with love. He looked at her like a man surveying a newly acquired property. The priest, a nervous man who clearly knew whose payroll he was on, began the service in Latin. Clara barely heard the words. Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Do something," her mind screamed. "Fight." But what could she do? Luca took her hand. His palm was sweaty. The priest asked the question. Luca said, "I do." The priest turned to Clara. The silence stretched. Every eye in the room was on her. Luca squeezed her hand, hard, a silent warning. "Remember Grandma." Clara started, her voice shaking. Crash! The stained glass window behind the altar exploded inwards. A canister flew through the air, landing at Luca's feet. Smoke hissed out, thick, white, and acrid. Tear gas. Chaos erupted. The Moretti soldiers jumped up, pulling guns from their jackets. The priest dove behind the altar. Luca grabbed Clara, pulling her tight against him, using her as a human shield while he drew his own weapon. "It's him! Kill them all!" he screamed, coughing. Through the smoke, figures clad in black tactical gear rappelled down from the broken windows. They moved with a brutality that made the Moretti soldiers look like amateurs. They carried AK-47s and spoke in short, guttural Russian commands. At the center of the storm walked Nikolai Volkov. He was bandaged, moving stiffly, his tuxedo jacket replaced by a leather trench coat. But the gun in his hand was steady. He shot 2 men before they could even aim at him. "Nikolai!" Clara screamed, the relief washing over her so intensely her knees buckled. Luca dragged her backward toward a side exit. "He's supposed to be dead! Why won't he die?" They reached a heavy wooden door near the choir stalls. Luca fumbled with the lock, distracted by the gunfire resonating through the small chapel. Clara saw her moment. On a small table next to the door sat a heavy brass candelabra. She didn't think. She didn't weigh the options. She just acted on pure, adrenaline-fueled instinct, the Volkov blood that Nikolai claimed she had. She grabbed the heavy brass base with both hands and swung it with all her might. It connected with the side of Luca's head with a sickening thud. He roared in pain, stumbling sideways, his grip on her releasing. He dropped his gun, clutching his bleeding ear. He looked at her, stunned betrayal in his eyes. "You little bitch!" He lunged for her, but a shot rang out. Luca jerked violently, a red flower blooming on his shoulder. He fell back against the door. Nikolai stood at the end of the aisle, smoke curling from the barrel of his pistol. He walked toward them, his eyes fixed on Clara. He stepped over the bodies of Luca's men without looking down. "Are you hurt?" Nikolai asked, his voice low. "No," Clara breathed, dropping the candelabra. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "I hit him." Nikolai looked at Luca, who was groaning on the floor, trying to crawl away. Nikolai kicked Luca's gun out of reach. "You did good, Clara," Nikolai said, a strange note of pride in his voice. He extended a hand to her. "Come, the car is waiting. We need to finish this." Clara took his hand. She stepped over Luca Moretti, the man who would have been her husband, leaving him bleeding on the floor of the chapel. She didn't look back. The invisible waitress was gone. They escaped in a nondescript van, driven by one of the terrifying Russians Nikolai had brought in. They sped through the labyrinthine streets of the West Village, heading toward Brooklyn. The safe house was an abandoned textile warehouse in Red Hook, overlooking the dark waters of the harbor. It was cold, smelling of rust and oil. Nikolai led Clara to a small office area, partitioned off with frosted glass. Victor was already there, pacing. He looked relieved when they walked in. "Boss, you got her!" "Thank God," Victor said, rushing forward. Nikolai stopped him with a raised hand. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted from relief to suffocating tension. Nikolai's face was a mask of stone. "How did they know about the bunker, Victor?" Nikolai asked quietly. Victor froze. "What?" "Boss, I don't know. They must have used thermal imaging." "The bunker is shielded against thermal. It's shielded against everything. The only way they knew exactly where to drill was if someone told them the blueprints." Nikolai pulled out his gun. He didn't aim it, just held it loosely at his side. "And how did they know we were at the Pierre Hotel that night? I only told one person to look into Clara." Clara looked back and forth between the two men. Victor had been the one to save Nikolai from the fire. He had called for help. "Nikolai, what are you doing?" "He saved you," Clara pleaded. "He saved me because his conscience got the better of him at the last second. Or maybe Luca didn't pay him enough to kill me, only to deliver you." Nikolai stepped closer to Victor. "Tell her the truth. Tell my niece who sold her mother out 20 years ago." Clara felt like the floor was dropping out from under her again. "What?" Victor's shoulders sagged. The facade of the loyal soldier crumbled. He looked tired, old. "It was business, Nikolai. Just business. 20 years ago, Katerina." She was soft. She wanted out. She was going to meet with Antonio Moretti to negotiate a truce, to end the wars. She was going to give up territory for peace. "So you told the Morettis where the meeting was?" Nikolai spat. "You let them ambush my sister." "We couldn't look weak," Victor yelled, desperation creeping in. "The Volkov name means strength. Katerina was going to ruin everything your father built. And then, 20 years later, you find her daughter, and I see the same softness in your eyes. You were going to risk everything for a stranger." "She is family!" Nikolai roared, slamming his fist onto a metal desk. "Family gets you killed in this life," Victor retorted. He looked at Clara. "I'm sorry, girl." "Luca promised he wouldn't hurt you. He just wanted the alliance." "You sold me," Clara whispered, horrified. "Like cattle." Victor looked back to Nikolai. "I did what I had to do for the Bratva. You know the code, Nikolai. Loyalty to the organization above all." "Yes," Nikolai said, his voice devoid of emotion. He raised the gun. "I know the code. The punishment for betrayal is death." Clara screamed, "No!" and lunged forward, grabbing Nikolai's arm just as he fired. The shot went wide, hitting the filing cabinet behind Victor with a loud clang. Victor didn't flinch. He knew it was over. "Don't do it, Nikolai," Clara begged, holding his arm with both hands. "You're not a monster. He saved you from the fire. That has to count for something. Please, enough death." Nikolai looked down at Clara. Her blue eyes, Katerina's eyes, were filled with tears, pleading for mercy in a world that rarely granted it. He looked back at Victor, his oldest friend, the man who had stood beside him through 100 battles. Nikolai lowered the gun. The silence was heavy. "Get out," Nikolai growled at Victor. "Leave New York. If I ever see your face again, if I even hear your name whispered on the wind, I will finish what I started. You are dead to the Volkov family." Victor nodded slowly. He didn't say thank you. He looked at Clara once, a flicker of regret in his eyes, and then turned and walked out of the warehouse into the cold night. Nikolai holstered his gun and collapsed into a chair, putting his head in his hands. The mighty crime boss looked utterly broken. Clara slowly walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't shake her off. On the desk, among the papers Victor had been looking through, Clara saw a small, worn leather journal. She recognized it instantly. It had belonged to her mother. It must have been taken from the Saddle River estate before it burned. She picked it up, her fingers trembling, and opened it to the last entry, dated 2 days before the fire that killed her mother. I know they found us. I saw the car parked down the street today. I have to send Clara away again, maybe to Mrs. Gable next door. I am so tired of running. But I cannot let them have her. I cannot let Nikolai find her. He loves too fiercely, and his love brings only fire. My sweet girl. I hope one day she finds a world where she doesn't have to speak the language of shadows. Lord, give me the strength to walk through this hell one last time so she never has to. Clara read the words, her mother's final prayer. Gospodi, dej mne sil proti через ito ad. She looked at Nikolai, the man her mother feared loved too fiercely. She understood now. It wasn't just about crime and money. It was about a tragically broken family trying to survive in the only way they knew how. Clara closed the journal. She wiped her tears. Her mother's prayer hadn't been answered. Clara was walking through the hell now. But she wouldn't just walk. She would rule it. Nikolai, Clara said, her voice clear and steady in the echoing warehouse. He looked up at her. Teach me, she said. Teach me everything. 6 months. It had been exactly 182 days since the night the chapel floor was stained with Luca Moretti's blood. In the world of organized crime, 6 months was an eternity. Empires could rise and fall in the time it took to age a bottle of cheap wine. But for Clara, it had been a lifetime. The private dining room at Per Se was suspended above Columbus Circle like a glass jewel box. Outside, the autumn rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the lights of Central Park into streaks of gold and gray. Inside, the atmosphere was hermetically sealed, scented with truffle oil, aged mahogany, and the musk of dangerous men. Around the long table sat the Commission, the heads of the 5 families of New York, along with key representatives from the Russian Bratva and the Albanian syndicates. These were men who didn't just break the law, they wrote their own. They were dinosaurs, mostly, men in their 60s and 70s, with skin like tanned leather and eyes that had seen too many funerals. The chair at the head of the table, the capo di tutti capi seat that had been vacant since the death of the old Don Antonio Moretti, remained empty. To the right of the empty chair sat Nikolai Volkov. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. The physical wounds from the siege at Saddle River had healed, leaving only faint silver lines under his shirt, but there was a weariness in his posture. He sat with a stillness that unnerved the other men. He wasn't drinking the 1982 Petrus that had been poured. He was waiting. Nikolai, grunted Don Salvaro, the head of the Genovese family. He was a corpulent man who wheezed when he spoke, his fingers adorned with enough gold to sink a small boat. We have been sitting here for 20 minutes. The veal is getting cold. Are we waiting for the ghost of St. Peter? Who called this summit? Patience, Salvaro, Nikolai said, his voice low and devoid of its usual aggressive edge. The host is arriving now. As if on cue, the heavy double-oak doors of the dining room swung open. The conversation died instantly. The clinking of silverware on china ceased. Clara Vance walked into the room. If anyone at the table had been at the Sterling Foundation Gala 6 months ago, they wouldn't have recognized her. The girl who had trembled under the weight of a silver tray, the girl who had tried to make herself invisible, was dead. She had been buried in the ashes of the Saddle River estate. In her place stood a woman forged in fire. Clara wore a bespoke black suit from Alexander McQueen, the sharp tailoring emphasizing a silhouette that was both feminine and intimidating. Her blonde hair, once long and messy, was now cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed her face like a helmet. Her lips were painted a deep oxblood red. She didn't walk, she glided. Every step was calculated, the click of her stiletto heels on the hardwood floor sounding like the ticking of a countdown clock. She walked past the stunned faces of the Dons. She felt their eyes on her, confusion, lust, dismissal. She knew exactly what they saw, a pretty girl, a mistress, a distraction. She stopped at the head of the table, directly behind the empty chair. She rested her manicured hands on the back of the leather seat. Don Salvaro let out a wet, hacking laugh. He looked at Nikolai, shaking his head. "Is this a joke, Volkov?" You bring your niece to a sit-down? What, is the coat check full? He turned his gaze to Clara, his eyes raking over her with disgusting familiarity. Sweetheart, we are in the middle of business. If you're looking for the shopping district, it's 5 blocks south. While you're standing there, tell the waiter to bring me another espresso. Use your pretty little voice. The insult hung in the air, heavy and toxic. The other dons smirked, leaning back in their chairs, waiting for the girl to flush with embarrassment and scurry away. Clara didn't blink. She didn't flush. Her expression remained as cold and smooth as the glass of the window behind her. She moved, not away, but toward a side table where a crystal decanter of water sat. She picked it up. She walked over to Don Salvaro. "Water, Don Salvaro?" she asked. Her voice was soft, melodic. "Espresso," he corrected her, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "And be quick." Clara poured the water. She poured it slowly, deliberately, into his glass until it reached the brim. And then she kept pouring. The water overflowed, spilling onto the pristine white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric, dripping onto Salvaro's expensive Italian trousers. "Hey, are you stupid?" Salvaro roared, jumping up and knocking his chair back. "Look what you did, you clumsy little—" "Siad Svinya," Clara said. The Russian command cracked through the room like a whip. "Sit down, pig." The accent was perfect. It wasn't the tentative learned Russian of a student. It was the guttural, archaic dialect of the Vorovi Zakona, the thieves-in-law. It was the sound of the Siberian gulags, the sound of the old country. It was the voice of a Volkov. Salvaro froze. The entire room went deadly silent. Clara set the decanter down with a sharp clack. She walked back to the head of the table, her eyes never leaving Salvaro's face. "My name," she said, switching to English, her voice projecting with the authority of a judge reading a death sentence, "is Clara Volkov. I am the daughter of Katerina Volkov. I am the niece of Nikolai Volkov, and I am not here to take your coat." She pulled out the heavy leather chair at the head of the table. The screech of the legs against the floor was the only sound in the room. She sat down, crossing her legs, and leaned back, surveying the table of powerful men as if they were unruly children. "I called this meeting to clarify the new order of things," Clara continued, her tone conversational but laced with steel. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, the Volkov organization has formally absorbed the Moretti territories in Brooklyn, Staten Island, and the Newark shipping yards." "You can't do that," a representative from the Gambino family interrupted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Those territories belong to Luca Moretti. He is the heir." Clara smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a predator's baring of teeth. "Luca Moretti," she said, savoring the name, "is currently being processed at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. You see, the FBI received a very detailed, anonymous dossier last night. It contained ledger pages, wiretap recordings, and GPS data linking Luca to 4 murders and a massive racketeering scheme." She paused, picking up a glass of wine that had been poured for the empty seat. She swirled the red liquid, watching the legs run down the glass. "Luca will not be making bail," she said softly, "and he certainly won't be running an empire from a cell in solitary confinement. The Moretti family is headless, and a body without a head rots. I simply removed the rot." Nikolai, still sitting to her right, finally spoke. "The transition was bloodless. We have already installed our captains in the key distribution hubs. The unions have been paid. The police have been pacified. Business continues as usual. Only the name on the check changes." Clara looked at Salvaro, who was still standing, water dripping from his pants. "Sit down, Don Salvaro, unless you wish to join Luca." Salvaro looked at Clara, then at Nikolai. He saw the shift in power. He saw that Nikolai, the legendary devil of Brighton Beach, was deferring to this girl. He realized with a cold dread that the girl was more dangerous than the uncle. The uncle used bullets. The girl used intelligence. She had destroyed the Moretti dynasty without firing a single shot, using the federal government as her personal hitman. Slowly, humiliatingly, Don Salvaro pulled his chair back up and sat down. "Good," Clara said. Now, to the matter of the shipping taxes. The Volkov family is raising the levy by 2%. 2%? The Gambino representative choked. That's extortion. That's the price of peace, Clara countered instantly. Under Luca, you had chaos. You had street wars. You had heat from the cops. Under me, you have order. Order costs money. You can pay the 2%, or you can try to move your product through ports I don't control. But I warn you, I control them all. She let the silence stretch again. This was the test. This was the moment she had trained for every day for the last 6 months. She had studied the ledgers until her eyes burned. She had learned to assemble a Glock blindfolded until her fingers bled. She had memorized the history of every feud, every alliance, every betrayal. She had killed Clara Vance, the nurse who wanted to heal people, so that Clara Volkov, the queen who ruled them, could live. One by one, the men around the table looked down. They picked up their wine glasses. It was a subtle gesture, barely noticeable to an outsider, but in this room it was everything. It was submission. To the new arrangement, the Gambino representative muttered, raising his glass. To the Volkov family, another added. Clara raised her own glass. She caught Nikolai's eye. He gave her a barely perceptible nod. It was a look of immense pride, but also deep sorrow. He had saved her life, but he hadn't been able to save her soul. She belonged to the darkness now. To the future, Clara said. She took a sip of the wine. It tasted like iron and earth. It tasted like victory. She set the glass down and checked her watch. Now, gentlemen, the veal is getting cold. Eat. We have a lot of money to make. As the conversation tentatively resumed, lower and more respectful than before, Clara turned her gaze back to the window. She saw her reflection in the dark glass against the backdrop of the city lights. She looked harder, sharper. Somewhere in a prison cell, Luca Moretti was screaming her name. Somewhere in Queens, a nursing school dropout was forgotten. Clara touched the small locket around her neck, inside of which was a picture of her mother. I walked through the hell, Mama, she thought. I walked through it, and I bought the building. The invisible waitress was gone forever. Long live the Queen. And that is the story of how Clara Vance went from serving tables to ruling the New York underworld. But the thing about the Mafia is, peace never lasts long. Clara's on top now, but Luca Moretti is still alive in prison, plotting his revenge. And there are whispers of a new player coming from Europe who doesn't respect the old ways. Do you think Clara can hold on to her throne? Or will the Volkov curse finally catch up to her? If you want to see a part 2 and find out what happens next, smash that like button and comment the Queen down below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching.